Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is R.S. Raghu and with me is Aditi Lumba, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison strongly condemn terrorism in all its forms. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine is ready to discuss deal with Russia to not seek NATO membership. Delegation from Gulf countries visits Jammu and Kashmir to strengthen ties and look at investment opportunities in the region. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett to pay 3-day visit to India from 3rd of April. Indonesia lifts all quarantine requirements for overseas visitors entering the country. India's ace shuttler Lakshya Sen enters top 10 of World Badminton Federation rankings in men's singles. And in Women's Cricket World Cup, India defeat Bangladesh by 110 runs at Hamilton. As we start the bulletin, we appeal to our listeners to stay safe from COVID-19 by following these 4 simple steps. Get fully vaccinated, wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. And now the news in detail. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison have strongly condemned terrorism in all its forms and the use of terrorist proxies for cross-border terrorism. In a joint statement after the second India-Australia virtual summit, which was held on Monday, both the leaders reiterated the urgent need for all countries to take immediate, sustained, verifiable and irreversible action to ensure that no territory under their control is used for terrorist attacks. They also agreed to continue to share information and coordinate on counter-terrorism efforts bilaterally and in Quad consultations and in multilateral fora. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on India-Australia Virtual Summit and beyond. In conversation are Dr. Rajiv Nayan, Strategic Analyst, and Simran Sodhi, Journalist.
We are discussing the India-Australia Virtual Summit that was held between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison. We see that both the countries have also developed their relationships, especially in the last few years. We see the depth of these partnerships has really grown. Dr. Nayan, when you see the summit that has happened today and the two leaders discussing a range of issues, how far do you think this strengthens the bilateral relationship?
Well, you're quite right when you told that this relationship is evolving, and this relationship is really evolving over the years. We can recollect when there was very tense relationship between India and Australia, especially after the Pokhran explosions. Different Prime Minister, including the current Prime Minister Modi, had really worked hard to elevate the relationship to the comprehensive strategic partnership level in 2020. But before that also in 2009, the strategy, it was of course elevated to the strategic partnership level. So it has been growing, it is becoming comprehensive, and now several areas have been discussed and where both countries are going to work in the coming years, in the coming decades, you may say, because it is a long-term partnership. The long-term partnership is not developed only for months or for a couple of years. It is developed for decades and sometimes even for centuries. So I think it is a really important relationship of Asia, of the Asia Pacific, you can say, or you can say Indo-Pacific.
We also see that the Prime Minister, while speaking at the open session of the India-Australia Virtual Summit, said that the mechanism which will be set up for the annual summit will help in the regular review of the relationship. And the Prime Minister also thanked his Australian counterpart for the initiative to return the ancient Indian artifacts, which he had also inspected ahead of this summit. Dr. Nayan, when we see the fact that Australia has returned the artifacts, and this means a lot to India given the historical significance especially, how do you think this gesture also helps in taking this bilateral relationship forward?
It's very important gesture, I would say, and it has got symbolic value. And it, again, just how I talked about, our relationship or the bilateral relationship has got implications, has got significance for centuries. Now we can recollect. For centuries, our cultural treasure was plundered. It was taken away. The artifacts and several our heritage items were taken away by different imperialist powers, different marauders, and they sold it in the international market. They even put it in their museum. So the governmental level action has been done to put it in the museum. Just imagine. So now at least the world is realizing when you are signing agreements to preserve culture of any other country, not to hurt culture of any other country, then really you have to return, you have to pay respect to your partner, your friend, or any other member of the international community. So not only Australia, from other parts of the world also, we are receiving our cultural artifacts, which all these artifacts are ours, and we are again putting them in their places where they belong to. So in that context, it is really relevant, and it is very symbolic, and it is highly significant. But one more thing I would just like to point out, that this is not just return of the artifact, which is useful in the India-Australia context. In fact, India and Australia are going to work on art and culture in different aspects, and they have allotted funding for that purpose. And in fact, one of the initiatives of the two countries is Australia Researcher Cooperation Hub in India. And this is one of the important items. This is one of the important area, you can say, of the bilateral educational cooperation between the two countries, where they are going to strengthen and increase bilateral research collaboration and showcase the research excellence of both countries. There are many other items also. There are many other issues and topics, but working on art and culture is also included in this initiative. So this is how it is very significant, and this is how I read it. It has got very great symbolic value.
And we also saw that the Australian Prime Minister talked about the threat of the changes that we are seeing in the Indo-Pacific region, and he spoke in the context of Russia's aggression, which we are seeing currently in Ukraine. And the Australian Prime Minister, he, in an apparent reference to China's aggressive posture in the region, said that the call by Quad leaders to discuss Russia's unlawful invasion of Ukraine also gave the opportunity to discuss the consequences of the terrible events for our own region in the Indo-Pacific. The question here is basically has two parts. So one is what we see happening in Ukraine and how India and Australia can probably form a unified response to what is unfolding in Ukraine. And the second, of course, is what we have seen in the Indo-Pacific, and what we have seen is basically the reference to China and its very aggressive posturing there.
Let me start with the first issue. That is the developments in Ukraine. This is what you can say Russian military action in Ukraine, or they can say operation in Ukraine. India has not condemned it, but India has not approved it. This should be kept in mind. It is not that we have been supporting the use of violence in international relations, unnecessarily illegal use of violence in any conduct of relationship between the two countries. So India has disapproved it. So it should be seen in that context. Second, India has also stated in different international platforms, it has stated on the United Nations Security Council, it has stated in the General Assembly and elsewhere also, that territorial unity and sovereignty of a country should be maintained. It should not be disturbed. So we respect territorial integrity and sovereignty of the country. So that is also highly relevant in the context of what is happening in Ukraine. We are also in touch with different stakeholders, different partners who are involved in this activities, in this operation, you can say, in this act of violence, whatever you like to call it. And we want that it should be ended as quickly or as soon as possible. In fact, India and Australia all have got the same objectives, the same idea. There could be differences of wordings about the description of the action which is taking place there. But overall, we have got great understanding that the rule of law should prevail. And we also want that the cultural unity which we just talked about and territorial sovereignty and territorial integrity of a country should not be discussed. So we are very much there. We also want that what we just discussed about the development of people, the growth of people should not be affected because of some act. So in that context, we are also discussing about energy security vis-a-vis Russia also. And more importantly, we are also concerned that any weapon which can have devastating consequences should not be used in war. So this is about Ukraine. Now coming back to the Indo-Pacific region, and which has led to the formation of Quad by the four countries, Japan, United States, Australia and India. And we also want that more and more partners should join it. And what we want here, it is not that we are simply interested in containing China or any other country. We want that rule of law should prevail, freedom of navigation should prevail and it should not be hampered, and there should be peaceful navigation or peaceful trade happening in the region, and people should live peacefully there. And there should be development and growth, and if any country is doing that, all countries should speak in one single voice. So this is our understanding about Indo-Pacific. So again, when we are working with Australia, we are working again in various areas. The relationship is multidimensional in nature. We are talking about high technology, we are talking about vaccines, we are talking about health, we are talking about maritime security, we are also talking about there should not be damage to environment, there should not be transactions of hazardous materials in the oceans, and there should be well protected sea lanes whereby trade can take place easily. So these are the issues we both countries have found that we can work together, whether in multilateral forums or bilaterally.
We also saw that the Prime Minister spoke of the remarkable progress made by the two countries in various sectors. The Prime Minister specifically said that trade and investment, defense and security, education and innovation, science and technology, in all these sectors we have very close cooperation. The Prime Minister also went on to refer to the importance of the economic partnership. Dr. Nayan, first, if you could just talk a little about the trade and investment and also the Prime Minister's emphasis on the importance of an early conclusion of the comprehensive economic cooperation agreement, which he also said will be crucial for our economic relations, economic revival and economic security.
India is the 8th largest trade partner of Australia. They trade in goods and services, and it runs into several billions of dollars. And 3% of the Australian trade in 2019 and 2020. So we are doing quite well, but not very satisfactory. So what has Australian government done? They have constituted a committee, and that committee has given a report. And we discussed, when Australian government came to India, they discussed about how to increase the economic relationship between the two countries and how we can make it multidimensional in nature, not just relating to one area. Like just now we are knowing that about 1,500 crore package of initiatives has been discussed in this meeting, and there are several sectors where the two countries are really going to work together, starting from critical clean technology to critical minerals to skills, defense exchanges, defense cooperation, innovation, skills, Matri scholarships. There are areas which have been marked, and already India and Australia CEO Forum is active. Treasury, NITI Aayog Economic Policy Dialogue is active. Also, we have got civil nuclear cooperation since 2014, and it has passed through different phases. And we are doing reasonably well. What I had just mentioned in my first segment, that Australia Researcher Cooperation Hub, or ARCH India, which we are generally talking about, it has also got several areas whereby we can work together, starting from advanced materials to agriculture. But I'm trying to say that the relationship is not only becoming comprehensive in nature, it is becoming multi-dimensional in nature, and we are trying to emphasize the importance of all the areas where both countries can work together to really develop the two economies, which both economies have suffered. I will not say great setback, but yes, of course, affected by Corona and many other problems. So now we together may really propel the two economies quite well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said he is prepared to discuss a commitment from Ukraine not to seek NATO membership in exchange for a ceasefire, the withdrawal of Russian troops and a guarantee of Ukraine's security. In an interview with Ukrainian television channels on Monday, Mr. Zelensky said, "It is a compromise for everyone." Repeating his call for direct talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Mr. Zelensky said, "Unless he meets with Mr. Putin, it is impossible to understand whether Russia even wants to stop the war." Mr. Zelensky said that Kiev will be ready to discuss the status of Crimea and the eastern Donbas region held by Russian-backed separators after a ceasefire and steps towards providing security guarantees. Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Tuesday spoke on phone with his British counterpart Boris Johnson. During the conversation, the two leaders had a detailed discussion on the situation in Ukraine. Prime Minister Modi reiterated India's consistent appeal for cessation of hostilities and a return to the path of dialogue and diplomacy. Mr. Modi emphasized India's belief in respect for international law and the territorial integrity and sovereignty of all states as the basis of the contemporary world order. The two leaders also discussed issues of bilateral interest and agreed on the potential of further deepening cooperation in various areas including trade, technology, investments, defence and security and people-to-people relations. Prime Minister Modi expressed his satisfaction at the positive momentum in the ongoing negotiations on the bilateral free trade agreement. He also appreciated the progress in implementing the India-UK Roadmap 2030, adopted during the virtual summit between both the leaders last year. Mr. Modi also conveyed his desire to welcome the Prime Minister of United Kingdom in India at an early date as per mutual convenience.
India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar met Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs of United States Victoria Nuland in New Delhi on Tuesday. In a tweet, the minister said discussions were held on expanding bilateral cooperation on South Asia, Indo-Pacific and the Ukraine situation. Japan on Tuesday criticized Russia over its decision to discontinue peace treaty talks over the disputed Kuril Islands and withdraw from joint economic projects in retaliation for Tokyo's sanctions over Russia-Ukraine conflict. Chief Cabinet Secretary Hirokazu Matsuno said that Russia's response is extremely unjustifiable and absolutely unacceptable. The two countries never signed a peace treaty formally ending World War II hostilities because of their dispute over the Russian-held islands north of Hokkaido, which Moscow took at the end of the war. This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts. Indonesia has lifted all quarantine requirements for overseas visitors entering the country. Tourism and Economy Minister Sandiaga Uno said that the tourists will be required to have a negative PCR test before entering the country from Tuesday. Indonesia had already implemented a 2-week trial of quarantine-free travel in Bali, Batam and Bintan Islands, where coronavirus numbers have been falling. Indonesia have already lifted the negative COVID-19 test result as a requirement for domestic flights. The government is expecting that the easing of travel restrictions will boost the number of foreign tourists to over 3 million this year. In the Indian Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir, a 36-member delegation from the Gulf countries is presently in Srinagar to strengthen ties and look at the investment opportunities in the region. J&K Lieutenant Governor Manoj Sinha addressed the Gulf countries investment summit in Srinagar on Tuesday and highlighted the scope to make the paradise on earth as the most beautiful investment destination in the world. The entrepreneurs and CEOs from Gulf countries are on a 4-day visit to Jammu and Kashmir to explore business opportunities in the Union Territory. Israel Prime Minister Naftali Bennett will be on a 3-day visit to India from 3rd of April to 5th of April. At the invitation of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the two leaders had earlier met on the sidelines of COP26 in Glasgow in November last year. A report.
The External Affairs Ministry said the visit of Mr. Bennett will be his first to India in his capacity as Prime Minister. This visit would take place on the occasion of the commemoration of 30 years of full diplomatic relations between India and Israel and 75 years of India's independence. India and Israel elevated their bilateral relationship to a strategic partnership during the historic visit of Prime Minister Modi to Israel in July 2017. Since then, the two countries have continued to deepen their strategic partnership with a focus on innovation and research as two knowledge-based economies. The visit by the Prime Minister of Israel is expected to further strengthen the excellent bilateral cooperation in diverse areas, including in agriculture, water, trade, education, and science and technology. This is Saira Mushtaba for World News, All India Radio.
In China, rescue efforts for the 132 passengers and crew aboard China Eastern Airlines flight MU5735 are on in the city of Wuzhou in Guangxi province. However, there are no signs of any survivors so far. State media reported that rescuers have so far found parts of Boeing 737 plane's wreckage and charred remains of letters, bags, wallets and identity cards. There is no official word so far on the casualties. Recovery work has been slowed down by difficult terrain. A drive to vaccinate more than 9 million children against polio has been launched this week in 4 countries in southern and eastern Africa after an outbreak was confirmed in Malawi, a report.
The urgent polio vaccination campaign has started in Malawi, where oral drops of inoculation are being administered to children across the country, including in the capital, Lilongwe, and the country's largest city, Blantyre. The vaccination campaign will be expanded on Thursday to include the neighboring countries of Mozambique, Tanzania, and Zambia, according to UNICEF, which is working with the governments and other partners. 3 more rounds of vaccinations will follow in the coming months, with a goal of reaching more than 20 million children. This is the first case of wild polio detected in Africa after more than 5 years, and UNICEF is working closely with governments and partners to do everything possible to stop the virus in its tracks, says Muhammad Mfal, UNICEF Regional Director for Eastern and Southern Africa. He said that polio spreads fast and can kill or cause permanent paralysis. UNICEF, the World Health Organization, and other partners of the Global Polio Eradication Initiative are supporting governments with the vaccination drive after it was confirmed in February that a 3-year-old girl was paralyzed by wild polio virus in Malawi's capital, Lilongwe. This is Saira Mujtaba for World News, All India Radio.
In Badminton World Federation BWF World Rankings, Lakshya Sen entered the top 10 in men's singles after a runner-up finish in All the England Open 2022. Currently, Lakshya Sen is the highest ranked among the Indian men's singles shuttlers at world number 9. The young women's double duo of Trisa Jolly and Gayatri Gopichan, after a tremendous semi-final run at All England Open, jumped massive 12 spots in the latest BWF rankings. In the men's doubles, India Open winners Satvik Sairaj, Ranki Reddy and Chirag Shetty reached the quarterfinals at the All England Open and are now the world's number 7 pair. In Swiss Open Badminton Championship 2022 on Tuesday, the mixed double duo of Ashwani Ponnappa and Sikki Reddy won the qualification quarterfinal round by 18-31, 21-16 and 21-17 against the Swiss duo of Alina Müller and Jenjiras Standelman. Top Indian shuttlers PV Sindhu, Saina Nehwal and Kidambi Srikanth will be in action in the round of 32 events on Wednesday. The Swiss Open will also see the participation of players like Sai Praneeth, HS Pranoy, Parupalli Kashyap, Samir Verma and Akarshi Kashyap in the singles.
India beat Bangladesh by 110 runs in the Women's World Cup at Sedon Park in Hamilton. Batting first, India scored 229 runs in the stipulated overs for the loss of 7 wickets. Yastika Bhatia 50, Shefali Verma 42 and Pooja Vastrakar 30 were the top scorers for India. In reply, Bangladesh were bowled out for 119 runs in 40.3 overs. Meanwhile, in another match of the tournament on Tuesday, Australia beat South Africa by 5 wickets in Basin Reserve, Wellington.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. Let us take a look at the press reports on China. South China Morning Post writes all 132 passengers and crew on board a China Eastern Airlines flight were feared dead on Monday after the plane crashed into the mountain in southern China. Xinhua reports that Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is on a visit to Pakistan and discuss bilateral and international issues including Afghanistan and Ukraine. Hindustan Times writes, Nepal announced on Monday that Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi will visit the country during March 25th to 27th. China received a major setback after Nepal Parliament approved MCC Compact, a grant of $500 million USD development assistance from US to Nepal. Kathmandu Post writes, Nepal, China may sign deal on feasibility study for cross-border railway. The Hindu writes Sri Lanka has sought a new loan and buyer's credit from China for $2.5 billion as the island nation struggles to cope with one of its worst economic meltdowns, a top Chinese official said days after Colombo obtained a $1 billion credit line from New Delhi. Al Jazeera reports The U.S. State Department announced on Monday that it is barring the Chinese officials from traveling to the U.S. because of their involvement in repressive acts and crackdowns on freedom of speech and religion in China and abroad. New York Post writes Elon Musk's extensive business dealings with China have sparked some alarm as Capitol Hill, with some U.S. lawmakers questioning whether Beijing could exploit connections with Tesla and SpaceX to gain access to classified information. Local media reported Hong Kong to lift flight bans, reduce quarantine for arrivals as 14,068 new COVID cases reported on Monday, decline in cases for straight 3 days. Flight bans on 9 countries will be lifted on April 1st. State media reported the number of marriages in China hit a new low last year, extending a near-decade-long decline and casting a shadow over Beijing's efforts to raise the fertility rate.
Let's take a look at what made the headlines in Nepal. Economic Times carried the headline China blockades traders from Nepal under the guise of COVID. Khabar Hub writes Pakistan's heavy reliance on China has resulted in massive debt and dwindling cash reserves. Business Standard reports Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is scheduled to visit Nepal from March 25th to 27th and hold bilateral talks with his Nepali counterpart Narayan Khadga. The Himalayan Times writes that Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deuba is scheduled to attend the 5th Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multisectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation Summit virtually on March 30th. Let us have some brief news from Afghanistan. Amal News writes, with mounting concern over the crisis in Afghanistan, Human Rights Watch reported that approximately 13,000 newborns have died from malnutrition and hunger-related diseases in Afghanistan since January. Tolo News writes, Acting Minister of Foreign Affairs Amir Khan Muttaqi said that the Islamic Emirate is inclusive and has fulfilled all the requirements and it should be recognized by the international community. The Hama press agency carried the headline, Pakistan will recognize the Taliban regime after a regional consensus. Haste Shab writes that a number of former government judges at a protest in Kabul called on the Islamic Emirate to make a decision about their future. They claimed that it has been 7 months since they received their salaries and have not been allowed to go back to work. Haste Shab writes, on the occasion of Journalist Day, a number of women in Kabul have protested against the restrictions imposed by the Taliban on media outlets. Tholo News reports residents of Kabul called for the celebration of Nowruz as the government said it does not intend to officially celebrate the first day of the 1401st solar year. Haste Shab reports that the residents of Farah call on the Taliban to respect the values and the culture of people as there is no sign of preparation for the celebration of Nowruz.
Let us have some brief news from Bangladesh. Bangladesh has welcomed the U.S. announcement acknowledging Rohingya genocide, noting that it might expedite efforts on accountability and repatriation fronts, reports UNB. Bangladesh was the world's most polluted country for the second consecutive year in 2021, according to the survey conducted by IQ Air, a Swiss pollution technology company covering 6,475 cities. Not a single country managed to meet the World Health Organization's WHO air quality standard in 2021, reports Prothom Olo, citing the results of the survey.
A quick look at the headlines once again. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Australian counterpart Scott Morrison strongly condemn terrorism in all its forms. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine is ready to discuss deal with Russia to not seek NATO membership. Delegation from Gulf countries visits Jammu and Kashmir to strengthen ties and look at investment opportunities in the region. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett to pay 3-day visit to India from 3rd of April. Indonesia lifts all quarantine requirements for overseas visitors entering the country. India's ace shuttler Lakshya Sen enters top 10 of World Badminton Federation rankings in men's single. And in Women's Cricket World Cup, India defeat Bangladesh by 110 runs at Hamilton. And now, before we end, let us listen to Mahatma Gandhi's favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Kyrgyzstan. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.